Now, the wave sheaf, wave loaves, and the Feast of Tabernacles illustrates our salvation in completeness. The harvest rites of the ceremonial system must therefore corroborate both the testimonies of the prophets and the parables concerning the harvest, for all are inextricably bound up together. The ceremonies of the first fruit and second fruit of grain must accordingly unfold the truth concerning the first and second fruits of humanity. In Leviticus, we read, "You shall bring a sheaf of the first fruit of your harvest unto the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, to be accepted for you on the morrow after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. And ye shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green ears, until the selfsame day that you have brought an offering unto your God. And he shall count unto you and he shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that he brought the sheaf of the wave offering. 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, ye shall number 50 days. And ye shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. You shall bring out of your habitation 2 wave loaves of 2 deal. They shall be of fine flour, they shall be baken with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord. Also, in the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. Now this is taken from Leviticus 23, verses 10, 11, 14 to 17, and verse 39. So, here we see the Lord command the observance of 3 harvest rites. 1. The ceremony of the wave sheaf at the beginning of the first harvest. 2. The ceremony of the wave loaves at the close of the first harvest. And 3. The Feast of Tabernacles at the close of the second harvest. Now, these being typical, these 2 grain harvests with their 3 literal sacraments accordingly foreshadow 2 soul harvests with 3 spiritual rites. So this lecture is based on the spiritual rites, which most of the time we seem to ignore. So during this lecture we will understand how important these services is even until this very day. Yeah, it works. Okay. So it's already recording. All right, so we will offer a word of prayer first.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay, Sophia twice.
Sophia, close one of your windows.
Right. Okay, so we are thankful to thee, dear Lord, for this wonderful privilege that we could gather today on this Saturday to study your word. We pray that your Holy Spirit will guide us and give us the understanding that we so desire at this time. And may it be for us that we may have a deeper understanding into your truth, that we be able to share it with others. This we pray in thy holy name. Amen. All right, so in Exodus 25, verse 8, you see, let him make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them.
Mm-hmm.
So in building a sanctuary, it was set up especially to take, what word I must use here? To take care of the sin problem also.
Mm-hmm.
It's what the sanctuary is. That's why at the end, it must be cleansed.
Right.
And cleansed from all the sins that were stored in the sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's what it's all about. Also, this sanctuary setting here, it's more as a shadow. I don't know why it's okay. Well, the setting that took place then is a shadow of the true sanctuary in heaven. If you look at Hebrews 9, you could read from Hebrews 9. I will move this now, and we will go to Hebrews 9 for the reading. I'm trying to all right, change screen. Yeah. So the reading from Hebrews 9. It says, from verse 1, it's saying, for then verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service. The first covenant. Remember, God made a covenant with Abraham. He confirmed the same with Isaac and Jacob. But he made it a law in Israel. So what that means, the covenant that was a promise, it become law in Jacob. And so in order for us to receive the covenant or the benefits of the covenant, you had to comply with the law. Right. So this is how the law came in with the covenant.
Right.
So, for there was a tabernacle made. The first therein was the candlestick and the table, the shewbread, which is called sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the table of the covenant, and over it the cherubim of glory, foreshadowing the mercy seat. I think we have an idea what the mercy seat look like. Let me put it up again. Right, so this is the mercy seat. Right? Now, inside this mercy seat was the 10 Commandments. And outside, on the side of it, was the laws of Moses. So
Okay.
this is how it was set up.
Hmm.
The law of Moses was the help for us to be able to keep the Ten Commandments. Now, after Adam fell, God had to give him a particular worship to assist him in living the overcomer's life.
Mm-hmm.
He made it more elaborate when he brought Israel out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is what you have the mercy seat. If you sin, you could come to God and get pardon. Right.
Hmm.
But remember that we agreed already that the commandments is the character of God.
Right.
And a sinner can't really keep God's commandment again after sin is in the flesh. So this is where the remedy comes in through the ceremonial service.
Right.
That's why we keep emphasizing that the only part that the law was removed is the ceremonial sacrificial law that points to Christ as the Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
We need every other law that God imposed on us. Right. So let me move this here.
I wonder if everybody understand this agreement that was agreed upon and became a law.
I think that's where the problem lies.
Understand, let's say from what we know a contract is a literally agreement.
Yes.
An agreement between two parties or a group of people. But what it is this is the agreement outline that this party agrees to do this part and the other party reciprocates and do their part also.
Right. This is exactly what it is. In that when God gave the laws to Moses to tell the people, he told Moses that all, in fact, they tell Moses, they don't want God to talk to them. Least them. Right. So let God talk to Moses and he will talk to them.
Right.
And all that he say, they will do. So Moses relayed that message back to God. And God say, okay, that's the situation here.
I just noticed another agreement within that agreement. They accepted that the word coming out of Moses' mouth was coming from God.
Yeah.
And that they will do as he says, coming from God. Now, if you go and you come and you don't accept what the word says that's coming from God, then you're not in agreement with what you agreed to.
Right.
So.
And they were supposed to hold up their bargain. And God will be with them as he said, in all things.
Right.
Right. So this is why the whole service was set up. Because he tell them when they reach any land, you had to have the whole service of Leviticus 23. This was the whole setting that had to take place then. Right? So this also, as we said before, was a shadow.
Yeah.
You understand the shadow is not a real thing. If you go out in the sun, you will see the shadow on the ground. That is not really you.
Right.
That is just the shadow of you. But here you are standing next to your shadow.
Right.
So this worship service that God gave to them then was just the shadow of the true worship that have to take place or did started in the heavenly sanctuary at the ascension of Christ.
Right.
This is what we must have clear. The shadow ended, but the real service will be exactly like the shadow. Because with that shadow, it's like you.
Right.
Right. So there's no change in the service.
What the shadow is actually is just the outline of what is you. It's not you, it's just an outline. This
outline
is what,
of you, yes.
Yeah.
Right. So when that service ended on earth, at the death of Christ, the heavenly one began in the heavenly sanctuary. How we know that? In Daniel 7, Daniel saw that the sanctuary was now being constructed sometime after the little horn. And then he said, the Son of Man was brought near. Right? And we know that it's from that point the sanctuary was set up in heaven, sometime after the little horn pour. So it was not always there in the heavenly sanctuary. Well, we could go into the different thrones that God have in heaven and so on and so on. But we're not dealing with that right now. But so the service began, well, John saw the service in full session, whereas Daniel saw it being set up. And John the Revelator saw it in full session in Revelation 4 and 5.
Okay.
So that's how we have to understand what took place here. And remember, it's to take care of the sin problem. What was in the past, as a type, the true service began in the heavenly sanctuary. So those of us who say, well, I think we have a problem in understanding what I believe true of a lot of us is when you use the word feast. I think that is where the problem is. So some people attribute it to eating and drinking. Well, I don't know what else. But the point was that when Israel was down in Egypt, they had a lot of feast days. And God now taking them out from there. Because, for instance, let's say they had birthdays, that was a feast day. They had, and they used to have a lot of parade on the River Nile and so forth. Easter, Christmas, all these were festivals or feast days in Egypt. The first their year was in the first month of the Egyptian year was really in September.
Right.
Okay. But they had the same 30 days. But in September. Eventually, sometime later, they had added an extra, I think it was five days for the birthdays of the different gods and so forth.
Right.
Okay. So when God instituted now his worship service, because seeing that you are acquainted with feasts in Egypt, to give them the understanding, say, these are my feasts. What he gave in Leviticus, all right, for instance, Israel was farmers. So Christ began his ministry talking to them of sower went forth to sow, some seed fell, so and so on. He is telling them things that they are accustomed to, which they will understand. So he brought the gospel now in a way that it is easy for them to understand.
Right.
So likewise, when he tells them, these are my feasts, which is the worship services of Leviticus. They will understand that they leave off the Egyptian feasts and have taken on the feast of God. So this is
I just want to make a point. Maybe they'll see the similarities between the feast back then and the feast that we actually participate in now that we shouldn't have. These feast days always had a literal celebration, and it always had food and a gathering together. These is a feast day. It's pointing out that you have food there and that it is a celebration.
Yeah.
Today, Christmas, it's a celebration, gift giving, and food.
Yeah.
It's a celebration. Thanksgiving, celebration and food. Easter, celebration and food. I don't know if they see this relation between the feast days back then and the celebration and what we're doing now. And there's a text that says, I will surprise them at their unholy feasts.
Yes.
So you tell me what feast he could possibly be talking about in today when he surprised them.
Even today, our sister was, the way she wrote or responded to what I said, there was a little animosity in it. And so talking about that as civilians or no civilian will ever keep no feast.
So no vows being performed.
No. So
keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vow.
Right. So it's a depth of ignorance I want to believe, did it? Because most of us grew up hearing when that ended. But we never go and check for ourselves because, for instance, like Paul, he kept Passover, he kept Feast of Tabernacles in the Christian dispensation, long after Christ already died. So I think it's a problem with the information that we have and what we made no effort to search out for either. But when will the present flow that the people have at this time?
Popular opinion.
Not understanding it's a worship service. And if you're not keeping God's feast days, then you are keeping unholy feasts. And these are the people he says that he will surprise at their unholy feast. So whatever you're doing that God said that God didn't tell you to do, that will be an unholy feast. And this surprising at the unholy feast, he said when he rises up from his ministerial work in the heavenly sanctuary. So we know he's in the sanctuary, and here why it will be a surprise. We have made no provision for the Feast of Tabernacles. We have made no provision for when Christ comes out from the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary. As Adventists, we all look forward for Christ coming to earth and take his sins to heaven. We believe in the Day of Atonement because this is what Seventh-day Adventist message is about, which was part of the feast days, Day of Atonement. And for some reason, we accept that part. But what God talking about as atonement, we really don't go into the depths of it. So we are in the antitypical Day of Atonement, which actually is part of the feast. But we still say we ain't keeping no feast. So it's a type of paradox. All right. So we'll come back to all of that. Now, in 1844, when the sanctuary, when the at the Day of Atonement, because let me make this clear, which I believe all of us know. At the ascension, the work in the heavenly sanctuary begun in the holy place, whereby sins was being stored. It's not blotted out yet, just as in the type. During the year, the sins were stored in the sanctuary until the Day of Atonement. So from Christ's ascension, sins were being stored until 1844, which will come the one day for atonement, when the heavenly sanctuary have to be cleansed. So it started through the books, and the first man to be judged, we will see, is from Adam, coming right down in time. Then it have to go over to the living, because it started with the dead, book work. But when it starts with the living now, your name will be blotted out from the Lamb Book of Life in heaven. And simultaneously, you'll be cut off from the congregation on earth. So you'll be cut off here, just as in the type, if you had sin recorded against you, you'll be cut off from the congregation on that day. We had up to the 9th day to make confession. So the Day of Atonement is not really a day for sinning and repenting.
Right.
The day is supposed to be free from sin. So that is why the call came, was a message saying, we are now living in the antitypical Day of Atonement. And she went on to say, it's a day in which we're supposed to be living without spot, wrinkle, or any such thing. Right? And like I said, it was part of the feast days of the time. So a lot of things that we reject now, we do some of it in part. Like, for instance, let's say tithe pain. Was that not part of the feast days?
Yeah. The Sabbath.
Yeah. The Sabbath was, I will put it this way, we had the Sabbath as a sign of creation that God made the heaven and earth. But these worship services that God put identify us as the true worshipers. So what we have to ask ourselves the question, what worship service that we have today that will identify us as the true worshipers? So in the book Review and Herald, it was supposed to be a paper the church have. In October the 10th, 1929, hear what it says. While the Exodus movement was a great movement, the second movement, the second Advent movement will be still greater. It's dealing with this church, the church today. God will take out the people, not from one nation only. That's like how he take them out of Egypt, but from every nation under heaven, and he will lead them into the heavenly Canaan. This Advent movement, of which the Exodus movement was a type, we believe was foretold in the prophecy in the following stirring language. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left. There there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, like as it was to Israel in the day that they came up out of the land of Egypt. Isaiah 11:16. Now remember, we quoted that today. Right. So this is where the type and antitype comes in. Israel came out of Egypt. So today God called his people out of modern Egypt. the world.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how it becomes the type and antitype. What went on in the past is what is today. So although God called us out of Egypt, some went back down into Egypt. Still Ellen White had to say, the church has turned back from following Christ the leader and is steadily retreating towards Egypt. So many of us have gone back to the worldly practices, even in worship.
Yeah.
Because if you
worship just like everybody else.
Yeah. Once you worshiping just like everybody else, you must know something is wrong with that.
Right.
There's no way you could be a peculiar people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, while you worshiping the same with every other church on the planet.
How are you standing now?
Right, this is how we had to ask ourselves. Right. So what they were saying here that the nomination today, remember 7/11, this first vision, or Ellen White's first vision, was the sealing of the 144,000.
Mm-hmm.
All to call modern Israel or true Israel out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So the first vision was the coming or the sealing of the 144,000 from the bloodline of Jacob. This is no longer the shadow, but true Israel received that call to come out of Egypt. You following what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Right.
Just the difference between the type and the antitype. The type is those who were called out of Egypt, and then the antitype was those who went back to the old worship.
No. The type we're dealing with Israel down in Egypt. Literal Israel was in Egypt, and God had to call them out of Egypt so that there will be a special people on them. Right. Today, well, we have, if you go back a bit, remember we talk a lot about what the papacy did and so on and so on. After the passing of the apostles, those who took over new modeled the church as it were. So all the Babylonian customs, all the customs of the world came into the church.
Paganism.
Right. So in 538, well, it brought in full that the papacy was running things then. So you will find that the church during that time would not have a full concept of how to worship God. So in 1500, it started with Martin Luther restoring back truth to the church. So from 1500 to 1930, it's like 430 years. Just like the call of Abraham to Israel coming out of Egypt was 430 years. You see in type again and antitype. You following me there? Nothing happens by chance.
Let me
Yeah.
let me see if I could go like a different route. Ancient Israel was in bondage in Egypt to their habits, their practices, their rituals, their feasts, so on and so forth. Now God sent Moses to get them out of there because they're God's people, and for them to be participated in this, there was a need to get them out because they're his people. Those practices, those worshipers, the way that they were doing things was an abomination. Had to get them out. Today, he's again calling his people out of this modern Egyptian practice, the things that we do, the Christmas, the this, the that, what we doing in church, the paganism that we find ourselves practicing in the church itself. Again, he's calling us out of there. So you see, there's a type that we can look back and see what transpired there and how it was brought about, how they got out of there, and it was through worship they got out of that. He gave them the way that they're supposed to worship, how they're supposed to worship, when they're supposed to worship, and so on and so forth. Today, we have to go back to that same practice. Coming out of the world today, we cannot be still in the world and be part of God's true church. So we have to come out and adapt those practices that they adapted coming out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. So type meets antitype, but it's the same type of situation. To get out of what you're practicing in Egypt and practice what God asks you to do, we today have to come out of the modern world and practice what God asks us to do. Hence, the contract or covenant, the agreement, verbally adhere to, say, we will do all that the Lord said that we would do. Yes. Perform thy vow, keep thy solemn feasts.
Right.
There's no questions on that. No deviations.
You see, you made an important point there about worship. When Adam fell, Satan became his God. So God now had to bring in a plan to redeem him back. So this, what we involve here is the whole plan of salvation. We belong to the end part of it. And it has to do now with who you're worshiping. This is the important part, because, for instance, part of the 3rd angel message, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of judgment is come. And, and worship him who made the heaven and the earth. So you ought to be sure who you're really worshiping. This is what he has put in place. He has put a particular worship service. Like I always quote for you all, Deuteronomy 4, verse 6 to 8, where he was able to ask the question, which other nation has any worship service, have any laws like what you all have? When we baptize, we have made the same covenant that the Jews made when they say, whatever God said to do, we will do. At our baptism, we agree that we bury the old man, and from then on, we're walking in Christ. That's a covenant that we made. If you go back on that, the word say you have crucified to yourself Christ afresh. And brought him to open shame. All right. So type and antitype comes right down the road. Like I was saying today when you asked the question, we were in Egypt, holiness, and you received the call to come out of holiness. 7 Adventists. All right, so let me go back a bit so you'll follow what I'm saying. You had Martin Luther. He was let's say the first one in the reform line from 1500, because this is where the 430 years for today began, from the time of Martin Luther. So you had Luther, John Knox, John Wesley, Alexander Campbell, William Miller, Ellen G. White. You had 6 reformers. each restoring back to the church truth that was downtrodden by Rome. So by the time 1930, it brings, there's also a prophecy dealing with that, which is in Ezekiel chapter 4. But we're not going into the prophecy. I'm just giving you the time how it went down. So from 1500 to 1930 is 430 years. Just as Israel had 430 years from the call of Abraham to the exodus out of Egypt. Again, I'm saying things don't happen by chance. Right? So our call to come out of worldliness to serve the true and living God, you must have a worship service different than what the world have.
Right.
So this is why in 1844, the call was true sanctuary worship. Sabbath and sanctuary was reinstated. But the point, we never really follow it up. We follow up some. Like I was saying earlier, we speak about the Day of Atonement. We speak about communion service, which took the place of the Passover, and so on and so on. So we do some. And the others we don't do because for some reason we say that ended on the cross. Right. So then a worship like that is not accepted by God. It's either you do what he says or you cannot be accepted. This is what happened to Cain. He didn't do what God said. I guess he thought he was doing the best he could. So he brought the fruits and so forth and so on. But he didn't bring a lamb. Today we are called to present our body now as living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, he said, which is our reasonable service. In other words, we have to be without spot, wrinkle, or any such thing. And the worship service that God imposed on us is what will keep us holy if we are obedient. Anything short than that, you are on your own. We normally quote that our righteousness is as filthy rags. So if you're not worshiping according to God's standard, then you remain in your filthy rags, offering to God something he's not going to accept.
I just want to make a point on, for those that say that everything was nailed to the cross. Let's go from the end of what we say was nailed to the cross, go back to the true worship. What transpired on the cross that was practiced before? It was the lamb that pointed to Christ. Christ being on the cross is referenced by the lamb, which was the sacrifice for sin, right? That was part of the worship. So when he performed that true sacrifice, that part of the worship back then was eradicated because he took the place of that lamb, which is the truth, not the shadow.
Yes.
So I don't understand why people would say that every part of the worship service was nailed to the cross when the thing that he did on the cross was the truth that referenced the shadow that took place before. So the service that identified the ever-living God, the worship service, is still there. But the sacrificial part of it is no longer there because Christ did that part.
And he remained the true sacrifice in the heavenly sanctuary.
Exactly.
Because when you look at Revelation 4, he was the lamb on the sea of glass. Well, we leave that for a while. So going back to this reading here, in Review and Herald, May the 1st, 1930, it was saying every evil thing must be shaken from the movement. So it was an Exodus movement. When there was no sin among the people, when there was sin among the people, the Lord did not give up them, did not give them up. He did not give up the movement, which he had brought out of Egypt and start another one. No, he didn't do that. What he did, he did not call the believers out, but he shook unbelief out of the movement by destruction causing their death. He purified by setting aside from it every element that did not belong with the movement that he was leading in accordance to his promise. On one pretext to another, unbelief and disorder moved out, while the movement itself marched on. So it's the same thing will happen today. He's not calling for another reform movement, as he called Luther first, Knox, Wesley, Alexander Campbell, Miller, Ellen White. He's not calling nobody else so. But he's going to purify this last movement, Seventh-day Adventists. This is why he says in Malachi that he will purify the sons of Levi and put them as gold and silver. And then he says also in Malachi 4 that you remember ye the law of Moses.
That's a good point you just brought up there, Sam. That purification, the purification is to bring the truth. It's to bring purity, eradication of all faults. How it is, we could look at it. He's purifying, but we're saying that he's just gonna take us as we are, and I guess perform some type of miracle. So why is there a need to purify if he's just gonna take people as they are?
Right.
That don't make any sense to me, and I don't know if it makes any sense to anybody else. But this purification, I would look at it as giving you some type of help so that all spot, wrinkle, or any such thing could be eradicated.
Right. So he has to purify this last movement. And those who survive the purifying will be 144,000. Now that is a little bit of people from the whole congregation that we have today. Because you have on the books, you have at least 24 million plus. So after the purifying work in the church, we saw, according to John the Revelator, only 144,000 was standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion. They alone survived the purifying process. The balance will be lost. No, that's a hard thing to tell folks.
Not so hard. How many people were saved in the ark?
Well, 8
people. 8 people. We got examples of him saving a small number. Those that made it to the promised land, again, they started off with a huge number, and those that actually made it was a small number compared to the original. So it's not unheard of that he will just take a small group to lead out in the work. His vanguard, his people, so on and so forth.
You see, I think what we fail to understand, I grew up here and there's a time for everything. You used to quote from, I think it was Proverbs. There's a time for everything under the sun.
All right.
No. When Adam fell, the plan of salvation kick in. Right. So we have in the process of time everything that transpired coming down. Until the death on the cross. Remember, he died on the cross for the sins of the world.
Mm-hmm.
A death that you and I were supposed to, in fact, we would not be having this discussion here if Christ had not died on our behalf and resurrected. So he has given us time, as it were. He gave us a probation of 6,000 years so that man could accept the sacrifice he made and be restored back in his image, or in the image in which he created Adam in the first place.
Sin-free.
Without sin, living an upright life. This is what his worship service is supposed to do for us. Because if you believe, he said, by beholding, you become changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But once you reject what he has offered, it makes it impossible for you to move forward. We have to remember, after his death, sometime we will have a judgment coming, because what it says, there's a statement in Ellen White writing that says, God will hold the world ransom for the death of the Son of God, or for his Son.
Mm.
All right. So if we don't show appreciation for the sacrifice he made, what could he do with us?
Enough.
Right? So here he have given us the remedy to live the overcomer's life. And he gave it us through the worship service for today, which is similar or the same as the Jews had then. And like we said before, the only difference is that he have removed the ceremonial sacrificial law from the earth, because it all pointed to Christ as the true sacrifice for sin. Animal sacrifice couldn't really cleanse you from sin, but only the blood of the Son of God. And this he already do. So now is the time for us now to that the sacrifice he made on our behalf bear its fruit. If it doesn't do so, well, those who refuse to make the change obviously will lose out. You cannot invent a worship service to make yourself clean. And the bad part about this whole thing is that most members, they know, I don't know what happened, but we all know in the paper sheet that stamped down the service to the ground. But for some reason, we allow the devil to keep pointing in our head that the whole thing ended on the cross. I don't know how we can get that out of our head. If it was ended on the cross, then nobody have any sin. There's nothing to repent of. Where there's no law, there is no sin. You can't say you're keeping the 10 Commandments separate from the ceremonial law. You cannot, because this is what he gave because of sin. Are we saying we're in a better position than the Jews then? That we don't need this type of law? And then what in the law is so bad? So we want that God gave them these laws, telling them he don't want them to do as the heathens do, as the nations around do. When you read these things in Leviticus, people, they're still doing it, you know?
Yeah.
Oh. It may even be happening among church members.
Worshipping false gods, so on and so forth.
and all the immorality that was taking place among the nations.
Yeah.
You understand? So this is why he gave these laws, to help you to live above all of that. All right, let me move on. Now, 1844, when we receive the truth of the sanctuary and the Sabbath truth, all we held on to since that to now is the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lord say, if you break one, you break all. Even Isaiah said that we're not even keeping the Sabbath. Isaiah 58. See, because if you were keeping the Sabbath, God will cause you to ride upon the high places of the earth and feed us with the heritage of Jacob. So the main idea you're not experiencing that. You must know that we have even broken the Sabbath as well. So in Revelation 13, when the Lord said, I saw one of his head and it was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. We know that the heads represent churches. And how come the head was on a beast? Let me go back a bit. The dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 we know, the 7 heads represent the churches.
Mm-hmm.
The horns represent civil authority. But they were on the red dragon. So that means just at the time Christ was about to be born, the devil had full control over the church and the world at that time. We understand the symbolism?
Yeah.
So the world at that time was ripe for destruction. So instead of God destroy the world, he sent his son just on the right time to save the world from partition. So a period of grace was extended to us again. So he didn't destroy the world. He gave us a chance through his sacrifice that we could go and do right, live the overcomer's life.
See, we gotta form the correlation between when Adam sinned. Adam was the prince of this world.
Yeah.
He was in righteousness, and he had one God. Through sin, he lost the kingdom.
Yeah.
And he had another ruler because he obeyed the devil's words. Christ dying on the cross brought us back because the wages of sin is death. Through his death, sacrificing himself for us brought us back.
Yeah.
Now it is up to us to live up to that standard, to receive the righteousness of Christ, to propel us through the future.
Right.
That's the correlation that we gotta, form in our heads.
Right. So this is what I'm saying here now, that a period of grace was extended again after the death of Christ to the Christian world. And that went on until 1930, because here we're seeing that the Bible is saying here in Revelation 13:3 that he saw one of the head was wounded unto death, and his deadly wound was healed. We know the head that was wounded was the papacy. Because like we said before, heads represent churches. Horns represent the civil authority. On the beast, leopard-like, or let's say scarlet colored. It starts with the leopard-like beast. The scarlet colored beast is the continuation of the leopard-like beast. Well, again, we're not going into the details of this study.
So the main idea, the wound healed. The healing of the wound had brought the world under a curse. This is why the scarlet color beast came on the stage of action at that time. But the woman is not riding on the beast yet. But it brought the world under a curse. According to the prophecy that I made mention of in Ezekiel chapter 4, Christ was supposed to bear the iniquity for 390 days for the house of Israel and 40 for Judah. After which, every man had to bear their own iniquity. 390 and 40 will bring him 430 years. So, at 1929 is where the fulfillment of this Revelation 13 came in, where the deadly wound was healed. In other words, Seventh-day Adventists, as the last Protestant movement, have caused the wound to heal for not worshiping the true God, true and living God as he said to do. Now,
so that's what caused the wound to heal.
Yeah.
Right.
The Reformation, what would I want to use here?
The Reformation caused the wound.
Reformation.
Yeah.
Now, what you were saying just now, go ahead.
I said the Reformation caused the wound in the first place.
Right.
Falling away from that Reformation that begun is what caused the wound to be healed.
Right.
So which direction should we take? We have to go back to the Reformation, continue that work, and then this wound will cause the beast to be killed.
Right. Now, what we did,
that's not important.
In fact, we betrayed the reformers. Recently, I was watching a documentary on Tyndale. These sacrifices that these brethren make wasn't easy, you know. So that we could enjoy this period at this time, a peace as it were, freedom of religion. And we make deep, deep compromises. Things that these fellas give their life for, they die, they burn on stake and so forth. We throw all that away. So right now, there's no difference between us and the other churches. It shows how deep the compromise is. The Bible had to say all the world wanted after the beast. We tend to believe that we're free from that. But if the head representing churches, it means all the existing churches at the time. And how are we living different than the other churches? No different. So what will happen with this? The Bible call it, or Ellen White call it demon worship. Because she says, in quoting in Revelation 13, hear what she was saying, but the cloud of judicial rod hang over them, containing the elements that destroy Sodom. In his vision, which is John, of things to come, the prophet John beheld the scene. This demon worship was revealed to him, and it seemed to him that as the whole world was standing on the brink of partition. Is there any change from the time Ellen White make that statement to now for the better?
No. It's gotten worse. We even go to put some of, the enemy's symbols as one of our symbols over the church.
Right. So she said, but as he looked, which is John, with intense interest, he beheld the company of God commandment keeping people. They had upon their forehead the seal of the living God. So who is the company of God commandment keeping people? Those who have the seal. How much people receive the seal?
Supposed to receive or?
Hear what he's saying here?
Mm.
She's saying that she saw the world as it is on the brink of petition.
Mm.
But as John looked with intense interest, he beheld the company of God commandment keeping people.
Mm.
They had upon their forehead the seal of the living God.
So it didn't say those that were sinning and repenting.
No, it's those who keep the commandment. And here she's saying, hear what he said, here's the patience
So
of
wait.
the saints.
You got to keep the commandment to receive the seal? You can't just live and repent? Is that what you're saying?
No, you have to keep the commandments. Because he said, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God, and have the faith of Jesus. So it can't, we keep beating our chest and saying we keep commandments.
Right.
Because we go to church on Saturday. What happened to all God's commandments? That he could say, here are they. You have 24 million folks, but God only going to get 144,000. Why is that?
They're not living up to this standard.
Right.
Not
So
obeying the law.
We never complied with the requirement. So the gospel net have to remain in the water. The water represent people. So the gospel net still remain in the world. God's still trying to get 144,000 who really keep the commandments. Because only them alone John saw with the Lamb on Mount Zion. And let me tell you, Mount Zion is not in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
As a church, we believe that that is in heaven, or some believe it's in the new earth and all of these sort of things. Israel was just the shadow. The 144,000 is Israel, the true. This is true Israel today, that John will see standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion. So most of us who call ourselves commandment-keeping people is going to lose out because we never comply with the requirement for salvation. We did what we feel like doing.
We pick and choose what we wanted to do out of God's word.
It's all right because we say that we Seventh-day Adventists because we living in the Day of Atonement, and this is what identifies Seventh-day Adventists, you know. The doctrine of Leviticus 23 that talks about the Day of Atonement, you know. How could you have a doctrine on something that ends? Explain that for me. This service ended on the cross, but our doctrine is based on that same service that ended on the cross. That making sense?
Not at all. Right.
The communion service, we say we keep that. That took the place of the Passover. Right? But it is the same standard that is required. We have to apply the blood to our doorposts. It's just the significance for today makes a little difference, you know. But God's service does still go, because when you read Ezekiel 45, you're going to have Passover service still. You're going to have Day of Atonement, not Day of Atonement. You're going to have Feast of Tabernacles. So all these worship services, and mark you, if the Passover is our type, if we do not apply the blood to our life, and we will be cut off.
Yeah, that was the type.
That is the type.
And it's not for those that may think, oh, we're talking about blood and this and that. For us today is not, we're looking back at it. And that was the requirement for them. The antitype of that is having a righteous life, applying all lives, participating in the true worship for us to be accepted. So the angel will pass over and we will not be cut off.
Right.
So.
Now, I want us to look at it. Look, let's try to follow the true service thing. You know, what we deal with here is more the type, right? And trying to give us a little picture of the antitype. I don't want to put up something on the screen here.